My foster daughters made fun of me and my job, so I stopped paying them, and they were surprised. Hello, Reddit. Before I jump in, I just want to ask something real quick. If you're enjoying these stories, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Not many people make it to the end of these videos, and the channel could really use your support. It helps way more than you think. Now let me tell you about something that changed my life in ways I never saw coming. My name's James Miller. I'm 44 years old now, a plumber by trade, self-employed, living in Louisville, Kentucky. My business, Flowmaster Plumbing, is something I built from the ground up, and I take a hell of a lot of pride in it. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving. My truck's a 2014 Ford F-150, beat up but reliable, kind of like me. I've got a reputation around town for showing up on time and not cutting corners, which is more than you can say for a lot of guys in this line of work. What you probably wouldn't guess, just looking at me, is that I was diagnosed with infertility when I was 25. I don't talk about it much. I was in a relationship back then, long-term, pretty serious, and we'd started trying. Month after month, nothing. Eventually, we saw a specialist, and that's when I got the news. I still remember sitting in that cold little exam room, the doc talking in that flat, clinical tone, saying words like low motility and non-viable. My girlfriend at the time tried to be supportive, but something shifted after that. A few months later, she left, said she needed a real future. That one hurt. Deep. After that, I threw myself into work. I wasn't trying to become some entrepreneur, it just kind of happened. One job turned into 2, then 10. Before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle alone, hired a guy to help, then another. 10 years later, I had my own little crew and a solid reputation. Still, I came home to an empty house more nights than I can count. I'd tell myself I didn't need a family, that I was better off not dealing with all that. But deep down, yeah, it stung. Every time I fixed a busted pipe in someone's house and saw their kids running around, it stung. Then one summer, July 4th, to be exact, I ended up at this barbecue my buddy Reggie throws every year. Reggie's one of those guys who knows everybody and always invites way more people than his backyard can reasonably hold. I didn't even want to go that year. I'd had a long week, 2 water heater replacements, and I sliced my hand open on some jagged copper piping. But Reggie guilted me into it. Said I needed to get out of my damn cave. That's where I met Melissa. She was standing by the cooler, trying to open one of those stupid twist-top sodas that never actually twist off, and one of her kids had just dropped a hot dog on the grass and was on the verge of tears. I handed her my pocket knife to open the bottle, and before I could say anything, the other kid threw a water balloon right at my chest. Dead center. I looked down at my soaked shirt, and Melissa just burst out laughing. Loud, full-belly laugh, not the polite kind. And for some reason, I laughed too. Her girls were 6 then, Lily and Haley, identical twins with big brown eyes and tiny voices. That night, Melissa told me her story. Their dad, if you can even call him that, had bailed before they were born. She said it almost like a joke, like, yeah, I was dating a ghost during my pregnancy. At first I didn't get it. I thought she meant he died. But no, she meant he vanished. Disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. No calls, no support, nothing. I was drawn to her immediately, but it wasn't like some cheesy movie where we locked eyes and sparks flew. It was slow, quiet, steady. The first time I showed up at her place was to help unclog her kitchen sink. She was trying to do it herself with a bent coat hanger and a bucket, and when I offered to take a look, she looked at me like I was offering her $1 million. That day turned into dinner, then another day, then more dinners. And suddenly I found myself showing up not just for her, but for the girls. I still remember the first time one of them called me dad. It was Haley. She'd fallen off her bike and scraped her knee, and when I ran over to help, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Daddy, it hurts." I froze, just for a second. Then I scooped her up and carried her inside. Melissa didn't say anything at the time, but later that night she sat next to me on the couch, took my hand, and said, "You don't have to be anything you're not. But they see you. You're here." That's more than they've ever had. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until she said it. The thing about parenting kids that aren't biologically yours is, it's not something you can fake. Kids know. They feel everything. They can sniff out hesitation like blood in the water. But those girls, they made it easy. Not because they were perfect, they weren't, but because they let me in. They drew pictures of us, started saving me seats at their school plays, would wake me up on Saturday mornings just to ask if I wanted pancakes. Somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing them as her kids. They were just mine. Melissa and I never rushed into anything official. No wedding, no big declarations. But we built a life. I fixed what was broken. She made our house warm. The girls, now young women, 18 this year, grew into people I'm proud of. Haley's heading to college in the fall, full ride for computer science. Lily's apprenticing with a tattoo artist downtown. Two completely different paths, both completely badass in their own way. And me? I never had a kid of my own. But I got a family anyway. Not in the way I imagined, and not on the timeline I thought I wanted. But it's real. Messy, beautiful, chaotic, and real. That's all I ever wanted. So yeah, that's how a middle-aged plumber who thought he'd never be a dad ended up raising twins with a woman he met over a soda bottle and a water balloon. Within 7 months of meeting Melissa, we were living together. It happened faster than I expected, but it felt right. Her lease was ending, and mine still had 8 months to go. My place wasn't anything fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom on the south end of Louisville, with floors that creaked when you walked down the hallway and a heater that made this loud clanking noise every time it kicked on, but it was home. When I asked if they wanted to move in, Melissa didn't hesitate. She packed up her little duplex, rented a U-Haul, and by the next weekend, our tiny apartment was filled with Barbie dolls, crayon drawings, and the kind of chaos I hadn't known I missed. The twins took over the second bedroom. We set up bunk beds and bought plastic drawers from Walmart to hold their clothes. I gave up my little home office space in the living room and stuffed all my work stuff into a single closet. It was tight, really tight, but it didn't matter. What mattered was waking up to the sound of little feet running down the hall. What mattered was watching Melissa finally get to sleep in on a Saturday while I took the girls to Cherokee Park to ride scooters and feed ducks. We didn't have much, but I tried to give them what I could. Some Saturdays I'd take Lily and Haley to the flea market off Preston Highway. They loved picking out cheap toys and costume jewelry, and I'd always let them each get one thing, no matter what. Haley once found this busted-up karaoke machine that didn't even have a working microphone, and I still bought it because she swore she could fix it. She never did, but they used it to stage living room concerts for months. Yelling into a plastic cup like it was a real mic, Melissa would sit on the couch pretending to be a judge on a talent show, and I'd record everything on my phone like some proud dad with a camcorder in the 90s. I made it a point to be there. Not just physically, but really there. When they had parent days at school, I showed up. I went to dance recitals, brought donuts to classroom parties, even dressed up as a scarecrow one year for the fall festival. At night, when Melissa was wiped from working her retail shift, I'd do the bedtime routine, bath, pajamas, 2 books each, then tuck-ins and lights out. I'd sit on the edge of one of their beds until they fell asleep, listening to them whisper about things like which boy in class picked his nose or whether unicorns could survive in the wild. Over time, the routine started to feel less like effort and more like instinct. I'd get off work and automatically stop by the grocery store for their favorite snacks. I started keeping track of their school picture days so they'd have clean clothes and brushed hair. I knew which twin liked what in her lunchbox and who needed her blanket warmed up in the dryer on cold nights. It's a strange thing, forming a family that way, not by blood, not by planning, just by showing up over and over until the lines between hers and mine blurred into ours. And that feeling, that unspoken shift, was what made me realize I didn't want this to be temporary. I wanted to be there forever. It was 2 years and when I knew it was time. I'd been sitting on the ring for weeks. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple white gold band with a modest diamond, something classic and clean. I'd saved for it little by little, stashing away part of each job until I had enough. But what meant more to me than proposing to Melissa was what I planned for the girls. I didn't want to just be their stepdad. I wanted to be their father in every sense of the word. So I found a lawyer who specialized in family law and asked what it would take to adopt them. There were forms, home visits, background checks, all of it. But when he asked why I was doing this, I just said, because I already feel like their dad. I just want the paperwork to match. I proposed in the park where we had our first unofficial family picnic. Melissa thought we were just there for another weekend outing. We brought sandwiches, the girls ran off to the swings, and I asked her to walk with me a bit. I stopped under this huge oak tree that the girls loved to climb, and I pulled out the ring. She cried before I even said anything. But then I told her there was more. When we got back to the bench, I called Lily and Haley over. They came skipping, their hair a mess from rolling down the hill, faces flushed and smiling. I knelt down, not just to propose to them, but to ask them if I could be their dad. I said, I know I'm not your real dad, but I want to be your forever dad, if that's okay with you. Haley threw her arms around me. Lily, always the more serious one, looked at me and said, does that mean we get your last name? I nodded, and she said, okay then, but only if you don't make us eat green beans anymore. We made it official 6 months later. The adoption went through, and the girls became Haley and Lily Miller. Seeing that on the paperwork, on their school forms, their mail, their library cards, it hit me harder than I expected. I didn't think names mattered much until I saw mine next to theirs. Then I realized it wasn't just a name. It was a promise. We weren't playing house anymore. We were a real family. And even though we still lived in that cramped two-bedroom for another year, it didn't matter. We were home. After the adoption went through and the girls officially had my last name, something in me shifted. Not just emotionally, though. Yeah, that too, but practically. I started thinking about the future in a way I hadn't before. I didn't want to just keep our heads above water. I wanted more for them. Their own space. A backyard they could grow up in. A school that gave them chances I never had. And that meant one thing. I had to hustle harder than ever. I started picking up every job I could get my hands on. Plumbing doesn't stop just because you're tired. Leaky toilets, busted water heaters, clogged drains. They come at all hours, and I made sure I was the guy who showed up. 60-hour weeks became my baseline. Some weeks, it was more like 70. I rarely took a full day off. Even on Sundays, I kept my phone on loud just in case someone called with an emergency. Melissa worried sometimes. She'd say, "You can't keep running like this forever," and I'd just smile and tell her, "I'm doing it for the girls." And I was. Every time I felt like quitting, I'd think about how they shared that small room, how their bunk beds creaked every time one of them rolled over at night. I wanted them to have their own space, to hang posters on the walls without fighting about who got which side. I wanted them to be able to invite friends over without feeling embarrassed. I wanted Melissa to have a kitchen she didn't have to squeeze around in. So I kept going. I kept grinding. I cut costs wherever I could. No vacations, no new truck, no extras. My work boots were falling apart before I finally gave in and bought a new pair. I brought lunch from home, skipped the fancy tools I didn't absolutely need, and poured every spare dollar into a savings account I called the Real House Fund. I didn't tell the girls at first. I didn't want to get their hopes up until I knew it was real. But every time they mentioned how cool it would be to have their own rooms, it lit another fire under me. Middle school came faster than I expected. One day they were these little girls watching cartoons on the living room floor. The next they were taller, moodier, and talking about school dances and electives. That's when I knew I had to make my move. I'd been scoping out listings for months, calling realtors, walking through open houses in neighborhoods I never thought I'd be able to afford. The one I landed on wasn't the biggest or the fanciest, but it was perfect. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a backyard with a sad little tree in the corner, and, this was the kicker, a school district known for actually giving a damn. The day we moved in, I didn't even tell the girls where we were going. I just packed the truck with boxes while they were at school, and when I picked them up, I said, "Got a surprise." Melissa was in on it. When we pulled into the driveway, the girls stared at the house like they couldn't process it. I handed them each a key and told them to pick a room. They bolted inside, screaming and laughing, running from one room to another. I stood in the driveway watching them through the windows, and I'll be honest, I had to wipe my eyes before I went in. The garage was unfinished, just concrete and plywood, but I turned part of it into an office. Nothing fancy, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a decent chair, but it gave me a space to manage the business without cluttering up the rest of the house. For the first time since I'd started Flowmaster Plumbing, I didn't have to take calls at the kitchen table or do invoices on the couch with the TV blaring in the background. It wasn't just a house. It was proof. Proof that the hours I spent sweating under sinks and crawling through crawl spaces weren't for nothing. Proof that you don't need a perfect past to build a future. Watching the girls settle into their new rooms, painting their walls, hanging up photos of friends, it felt like I was watching them grow roots. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Just a little. As the girls got older, everything around them, and around me, started getting bigger. Their personalities, their interests, their appetites, their opinions, and especially the bills. It's wild how fast it all shifted. One minute, I was tripping over stuffed animals in the hallway. The next, I was helping Lily set up a studio space in the garage so she wouldn't get paint on the living room floor. Lily turned inward in a way that caught me off guard at first. She was always the quieter of the two, but around middle school, she fully embraced it. Painting, drawing, sculpting. She got completely lost in her own little world. I'd come home from a 12-hour job and find her sitting cross-legged on the floor, hands covered in clay, music barely audible through her headphones. She had a talent, a real one, and I wanted to give her every opportunity to chase it. So I did. I bought her brushes that cost more than I used to spend on dinner, pads of sketch paper in bulk, canvases stacked in the closet. When she outgrew the basics, I paid for her to take a summer workshop at a community arts center downtown, and she came back talking about charcoal techniques like she was already a professional. Haley, on the other hand, went in the complete opposite direction. My social butterfly. She was everywhere. Pep rallies, clubs, school events, birthday parties for people she barely knew. She somehow managed to get elected to student government and was constantly planning fundraisers or dances or something else that required just a little money. Dad, please. She started caring about clothes, real clothes, Not the bargain bin stuff I used to pick up at the outlet malls. Brands I'd never even heard of. Shoes that cost more than I spent on tools. But every time she walked out the door smiling, confident, like she owned the world, it felt worth it. They both needed different things, but they needed them constantly. New iPads for school. Better phones to keep up with friends. Trips. Birthday parties. Fees for every sport, camp, or class you could think of. It added up fast. I started tracking it all out of curiosity one month, just to see, and when I added it up, I sat back in my chair and let out a long, tired laugh. That number was no joke. Still, I didn't hesitate. I picked up extra jobs when I had to. Took on weekend work even when I was dead on my feet. I kept putting money into their college funds too. Small amounts at first, just $50 here and there, but I was consistent. If I couldn't give them a trust fund, I could at least give them a head start. Melissa had been working part-time ever since we moved into the new place, mostly in retail and a couple of front desk gigs. But when the girls hit high school, she told me she was going back to school. She wanted to become a nurse, something she'd talked about years earlier but had always put on the back burner. I supported her 100%, even though it meant even tighter months for a while. She worked her tail off, night classes, clinical rotations, studying at the kitchen table while the girls fought over the remote. 2 years later, she got her RN license and landed a full-time job at a local hospital. It changed things a little. Not drastically, but it helped. She was finally able to take on a bigger share of the bills, buy groceries without me handing her cash, take the girls shopping once in a while without asking if it would throw off our budget. But even with her income, I was still covering about 80% of everything. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, school costs, you name it. And I was okay with that. I never expected Melissa to match what I made. Nursing isn't a get-rich career. But I saw how hard she worked, how seriously she took it, and that made all the difference. She wasn't sitting back watching me carry everything. She was in the trenches too. And even though I was still doing most of the heavy lifting financially, it finally started to feel like we were doing it together. Every time I watched Lily disappear into her sketchbook or saw Haley walk out the door like she owned the world, I reminded myself this was the whole point. The work, the hours, the stress, it all had a purpose. I didn't grow up with much, and I never expected to give my kids everything, but I wanted them to have chances. Real chances. And I was willing to do whatever it took to make sure they did. By the time the girls turned 17, things started to shift. At first, I chalked it up to normal teenage growing pains. More eye rolls, shorter answers, a little less interest in hanging out with me. I figured it was just part of the deal. I wasn't expecting them to stay little forever. But the distance didn't just stay in the background. It grew, slowly, then all at once. What started as shrugged shoulders and whatever became full-on attitude. Doors slammed. Messages left on read. The kind of cold silence that makes you feel like a stranger in your own home. Lily, my quiet one, the girl who used to sit beside me sketching while I sorted invoices at the kitchen table, had locked herself in a world I wasn't part of anymore. Her art had evolved. She was good, scary good, and she started talking about applying to a top-tier art school in California. Not just any school, but one with a tuition price tag that made my stomach knot up the second I Googled it. She didn't ask what we could afford. She didn't want to talk about backup plans or in-state options. She had a dream, and in her eyes, that was all that mattered. Any suggestion otherwise was met with a look that said I didn't believe in her. Haley, on the other hand, was all about the social finish line. Senior year had turned into a non-stop stream of events. Prom prep, weekend trips, group dinners, last-minute mall runs. The latest bombshell was a graduation trip to Miami with her friends. $700, not including spending money. When she brought it up, she did it like it was already settled, like she'd be going regardless. Everyone's going, Dad. It's a big deal. You don't want me to be the only one who can't, right? Her tone wasn't exactly grateful. It was closer to expectation, like this was just one more thing I'd obviously cover. And the truth is, I said yes. Not in so many words, but I said, we'll figure it out. Because I didn't want to be the reason they missed out. I didn't want to be the parent who limited their world. I remembered what it felt like to sit things out growing up, not because I didn't want them, but because there was just no way. And even though I was anxious about money, always anxious, always doing math in my head, I swallowed it. I convinced myself I'd make it work. Maybe take on some weekend emergency calls, push off that dental bill again, skip a couple meals out. Whatever it took. But what stung wasn't the money. It was how easily they seemed to forget what it took to say yes. The long hours, the middle of the night service calls, the weekends I gave up to make things happen. I used to come home and get hugs. Now I came home and barely got a nod. Melissa tried to play mediator sometimes. They're just growing up, she'd say. Or, you remember what you were like at 17. And yeah, I do. But I also remember respecting the people who showed up for me. I remember knowing who paid the bills and who stayed up late to make sure I had clean clothes and food on the table. I kept telling myself it would pass, that this was just a phase. But every time I caught Lily rolling her eyes when I asked about school, or heard Haley mutter something under her breath when I reminded her about curfew, I felt that familiar knot in my chest tighten. I wasn't asking for applause. I didn't need some big show of gratitude. But a little acknowledgement would have gone a long way. Still, I said yes to the art school applications. I said yes to the Miami trip. I said yes to every damn thing I could, because deep down, I still believed that showing up mattered. That maybe one day, they'd look back and understand what it took. That even if they couldn't see it now, the sacrifices meant something. Even if they forgot to say thank you. It was a Thursday, and I remember that because the job I had scheduled, some water heater replacement on the east side, got canceled last minute when the client rescheduled. I didn't get a lot of unexpected time off, so I figured I'd use the couple hours to swing by the house, maybe grab a late lunch, and surprise the girls. It had been a rough week, back-to-back emergency calls, my shoulder aching from crawling under an old fixer-upper 2 days prior, and the idea of catching even 30 minutes of quiet at home felt like gold. I pulled into the driveway around 2:30. The sun was still high, warm enough that the windows upstairs were cracked open. I noticed the girls' car in front, so I knew they were home early, probably done with school for the day. As I turned off the engine, I sat for a second, finishing the last sips of coffee from a cup that had long gone cold. That's when I heard them. At first it was just laughter. Lily's voice, then Haley's, both familiar and carefree. It made me smile, hearing them like that, like when they were little and used to put on skits in the living room. I started to reach for my keys, but then I caught part of what Lily was saying. Her tone had that snide edge to it, the kind that comes out when someone thinks they're being clever. "Watch out," she said. "Don't sit too close, or you'll smell like toilet water." Dad probably just crawled out of a sewer again. They both burst out laughing. I froze, just sat there in the truck, keys in my hand, trying to figure out if I heard that right. Haley followed it up with, "Our broke-ass plumber stepdad, who tries way too hard. Always coming home smelling like PVC glue and desperation." Another round of laughter. Not nervous laughter, not the kind that hides guilt. This was cruel in that casual, confident way, the way people talk when they think no one's listening. I don't know why I didn't get out of the truck. Maybe part of me needed to know how deep it went. Maybe I thought they'd pivot. Maybe Lily would say something to soften it. She didn't. Instead, I heard Haley again, her voice a little lower now, like she was about to share a real secret. "He's not even our real dad," she said. Mom just settled. Settled. That word hit harder than any insult I've ever taken in my life. Settled. Like I was some consolation prize. Like the years I spent working myself into the ground were just filler until something better came along. I sat there, completely still, staring at the side of the house I had fought to buy, the walls I painted with them, the roof I patched myself last winter while my back was still messed up. I built this place for them. Every screw, every wire, every brick of it had a piece of me in it. And now I was just the broke-ass plumber who tried too hard. I didn't storm in. I didn't say a word. I sat in that truck for another 5 minutes, maybe more, trying to breathe around the tightness in my chest. I tried to make excuses in my head. Maybe they were joking. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe it came out wrong. But I couldn't lie to myself. They weren't kids anymore. They knew what they were saying. And they meant it. I eventually started the engine again and backed out of the driveway. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't walk through that door right then and pretend like I hadn't heard what I heard. Everything changed in those 5 minutes. Not the facts. I was still the same man. Still the one who'd raised them, paid for their clothes, driven them to school, cheered at their events. But the truth settled in like a crack running through concrete. They didn't see me the way I saw them. Not even close. I didn't go home right away. After I backed out of the driveway, I drove aimlessly for over an hour. No music, no podcasts, no calls. Just the sound of the road, and that one sentence echoing over and over in my head. "He's not even our real dad." Mom just settled. I don't remember half the streets I turned onto, but I remember the feeling. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My jaw was clenched the entire time. I didn't yell. I didn't punch the dashboard. I just sat there, heartbroken and burning. 12 years. That's how long I'd been in their lives. 12 years of school drop-offs, homework help, late-night fevers, birthday parties, scraped knees, slammed doors, whispered apologies, packed lunches, and whispered prayers that I was doing enough. And with just one cruel conversation, they tossed it all aside like it was nothing. Not even our real dad. Broke-ass plumber. Tries too hard. Like every sacrifice I made was just some pathetic effort to earn points I was never going to get. I didn't say anything when I finally got home that evening. I walked through the front door, nodded a silent hello to Melissa, and went straight to the shower. I scrubbed my arms until they were red, like I could wash off the sting of what I'd heard. The girls were in their rooms, laughing at something on their phones. Business as usual. I sat at the dinner table, ate my food quietly, and when Melissa asked how my day was, I lied. I told her it was fine. But that night, lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling fans spinning above me, something shifted in me. I had always operated on one belief, that if you show up every day and give your whole heart to people, they'll see that, and it'll matter. I didn't need praise. I didn't need them to call me dad every 5 minutes. But I needed to believe it meant something. That what I gave them, my time, my work, my energy, was real. And now I knew. It didn't mean to them what it meant to me. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw it in their faces. But if I wasn't a father in their eyes, then they weren't going to get the benefits of fatherhood. Not anymore. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank after my first service call. I opened a new checking account in my name only. I moved over half of what was in our family savings, every dollar I'd contributed to over the years, and left the rest alone. I updated my direct deposit, split my paychecks, some to the joint account for the mortgage and essentials, the rest into my new one. I canceled the automatic transfers to the girls' college funds. I didn't empty them, but I stopped adding to them. If Melissa wanted to continue, that was her choice. I wasn't doing it out of spite. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. Cold, quiet clarity. If I was just the stepdad, the plumber, the guy who tries too hard, then fine. Let them see what life looks like without the man they took for granted constantly holding everything together. I didn't slam doors. I didn't throw down rules. I just changed the flow. Let the balance reflect the reality. Let the numbers tell the truth, since words had failed. The first change I made was at the grocery store. No more special trips for organic this or gluten-free that. I walked past the brand-name cereals and the overpriced snacks they used to toss in the cart without a second thought. I picked up store-brand everything, stuck to the basics, and ignored the fancy labels. I used to go out of my way to get Lily's almond milk and Haley's expensive yogurt, the kind that came in little glass jars they never bothered to recycle. Not anymore. Now it was one kind of milk, one kind of bread, and if they didn't like it, they could skip it. Next, I went through the bathroom cabinets. The premium shampoo and conditioners, the fancy hair masks Haley had begged for, the skincare sets that cost more than a tank of gas, they were done. When they ran out, they ran out. I replaced it all with simple, no-frills drugstore basics. Lily's endless supply of professional-grade paint, her specialized sketchbooks, imported markers, not another dime. She had enough stocked up to last a while, and when that ran dry, well, she could get creative. Then came the internet. I called the provider and downgraded our plan. No more lightning-fast speeds for their endless streaming and FaceTime marathons. Buffering became a reality again, and I didn't lose a minute of sleep over it. I also went through the subscriptions tied to my card and started cutting them one by one. Spotify Family Plan. Gone. Apple Music. Cancelled. Any app or service I didn't personally use vanished from the monthly bills like it had never existed. I even took a pair of old headphones back from Haley's room that she hadn't paid for. She found them missing the next day and came storming out of her room like I'd robbed her. "What's going on?" she asked, arms folded tight, voice laced with attitude. "Time to live like regular kids," I said, not even looking up from the invoice I was reviewing. She blinked, caught off guard. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said calmly, "this house doesn't run on entitlement." Lily caught on quick too. When she asked about a new set of pastels she'd bookmarked online, I told her she was welcome to use what she had or save up for the rest. When she mentioned an art supply sale at the store we used to frequent, I nodded and went back to unloading the dishwasher. I stopped offering rides unless it was absolutely necessary. If they needed to get somewhere, they had to coordinate it themselves. I used to be their on-call chauffeur, dropping everything to drive them to friends' houses, events, even last-minute Target runs for some imaginary crisis. Not anymore. I had a job, and if I wasn't working, I was resting. If they wanted to treat me like the help, they could figure out how to get around without the help. At first, they didn't say much, just exchanged confused looks and made snide comments under their breath. But the frustration started to bubble. When Haley asked why we were suddenly living like we were broke, I gave her the same line. Time to live like regular kids. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer long explanations. I let the silence do the talking. Let them sit with the shift. 12 years, I gave them the world. Now they could start learning what the real world looks like without it. It didn't take long for things to reach a boiling point. Haley was the first to snap. She cornered me in the kitchen one evening, waving her phone in one hand and frustration painted all over her face. "The payment's due next week, Dad," she said, tapping the screen. $700. You said you'd help with the Miami trip. Everyone's already booked their flights. I didn't even put down the dish I was drying. I looked her in the eyes and said, "No." She stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "What do you mean, no? You said we'd figure it out." "And we did," I said calmly. "You can figure it out without me." That's when the tantrum hit. Full volume, arms flailing, stomping feet, the whole performance. "This is so unfair. You're literally ruining my graduation. Everyone else's parents are paying. Why are you being like this now?" I didn't flinch. I didn't yell. I just dried the plate, set it down, and said, "You can still go. You just have to pay for it yourself. Welcome to adulthood." She stormed off, muttering something about how embarrassing it was to have a cheap-ass stepdad who acts like he's broke all the time. I didn't even bother correcting her. I just walked away. 2 days later, Lily came to me with a folded-up list and a hopeful look in her eyes. It was a breakdown of all her upcoming art school applications, 5 colleges, all out of state, all with hefty fees. "I know things are tight," she started, "but I just need $500 to cover the applications. That's it. I'll handle the rest later." I looked at the list, nodded, and handed it back to her. "No." She blinked. "Wait, what?" "Dad." I said no. I repeated. "You want it, you earn it. Just like everyone else. But this is my future. And this is real life," I said. "You're talented, Lily. I've always supported you. But if I'm not your real dad, then you're not entitled to my real money. You want to be treated like an adult? Start acting like one." She didn't scream like Haley did. Lily's silence was different, sharper. She stood there for a few seconds, her jaw clenched, eyes glossy with disbelief, before turning and walking out of the room. I heard her door close harder than usual, but not quite a slam. That night, Melissa sat down across from me at the table, nursing a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "What's going on with you?" she asked softly. "The girls are saying you've changed." I set my phone down and met her eyes. "I came home early last week," I said. "They didn't know I was outside. The window was open." Her eyebrows pulled together. "Okay." I told her everything, word for word. I repeated Lily's joke about me crawling out of a sewer, Haley's voice calling me their broke-ass stepdad, and then the one that really gutted me. How I wasn't even their real dad, and she believed you just settled. I said it slowly, carefully, like saying it any faster might crack something wide open. Melissa's face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, staring into her mug like it held answers. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They said that." I nodded once. Every word. She didn't defend them, didn't offer excuses. Just let the weight of it settle between us like dust in a quiet room. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I never would have let them talk like that if I had." "I know," I said. "But they did. And now I'm done pretending." Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. I laid it out for them one evening at the table. No anger in my voice, no dramatic build-up, just facts. "You want money? Then get jobs. That's how it works." Melissa didn't say much. She sat across from me, watching the girls' reactions closely, probably thinking the same thing I was. This was long overdue. At first, they looked stunned. Lily opened her mouth like she was about to argue, but closed it again when she saw I wasn't bluffing. Haley leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her face already settling into a familiar scowl. "Seriously," she said. "You're really going to make us work during senior year?" "Yes," I said. "Seriously." By the end of the week, Lily landed a part-time job at a little coffee shop a few blocks from school. She had to take a bus there and back because I'd already made it clear I wasn't a personal chauffeur anymore. Her first shift ran 5 hours, mostly cleaning tables and washing dishes in the back, since she wasn't trained yet to work the register. She came home smelling like burnt espresso and old milk, dropped her bag by the door, and said nothing the rest of the night. Haley, after a few days of dragging her feet, finally got hired as a hostess at a local chain restaurant. She didn't look thrilled when she put on her uniform, black slacks and a company-branded polo she called the ugliest thing ever invented, but she showed up. Her first shift was a Friday night, slammed with impatient customers and a manager who didn't care how cute her Instagram following was. She came home just before midnight, pulled off her shoes at the door, and left them there, like even bending over was too much effort. By the end of that first week, both of them were different. Not completely, not overnight, but noticeably. They were tired. Not just sleepy, but bone-tired, the kind that settles into your muscles after standing too long, smiling too much, pretending to care about people who treat you like furniture. I watched them each day come in a little quieter, their complaints a little more measured. No more jokes about toilets. No more remarks about broke-ass anything. They were learning fast what it meant to trade your time for money, to be spoken to like you didn't matter, to have to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, through gritted teeth because you needed the paycheck. They started eating whatever was in the fridge without complaint. Stopped asking for brand name anything. One night, Haley came into the kitchen while I was making myself a sandwich, looked at the stack of dishes in the sink, and quietly started washing them without being asked. She didn't say why, and I didn't say thank you. We just worked in silence. They were learning, the hard way, that nothing in life is free. Not time, not comfort, and certainly not love dressed up as endless giving. 2 weeks after she started, Lily came home holding a crumpled envelope in her hand, the kind you only ever see when someone's just gotten paid in cash or from a small business too broke to bother with direct deposit. She dropped her bag by the door and opened the envelope at the kitchen counter while I was fixing a leak under the sink. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the check like it might change if she blinked enough times. $280, she finally said. I slid out from under the sink, wiped my hands on a rag, and stood up. I looked at her and asked, now imagine raising 2 kids on that. Her face changed. Not dramatically, not some cartoonish shock, but something small and real. Her shoulders dipped just a bit. Her jaw tightened. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. That number hit her like a truck. All the years I'd been doing exactly that, feeding them, clothing them, showing up for everything, on paychecks just like the one she now held in her hand. Haley's moment came a little more explosive. It was a Saturday night. She came through the door red-eyed and shaking, slammed her purse down on the floor, and muttered something I couldn't quite catch. Melissa looked up from the couch and asked if everything was okay, but Haley just shook her head. Some guy screamed at me tonight, she said, voice cracking. Over a fork. A damn fork. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you do? She looked at me, voice rising. I stood there and took it. I can't even yell back, or I'll get written up. It's humiliating. Welcome to real work, I said quietly. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She stormed off to her room, and I heard her door shut, not slammed this time. Just shut like she was too tired to put more energy into it. That was the difference. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was exhaustion. She was learning firsthand how little the world cared about your comfort when you were just another name on a schedule. Over the next week, something shifted in both of them. Small things. Haley started asking if I needed anything when she saw I was heading out for supplies. Lily stopped complaining about dinner, even when it was the same basic pasta for the 3rd night in a row. They still had their moods, still acted like teenagers, but the sharpness was dulling. The entitlement that used to coat every request like a layer of syrup was thinning. They were seeing it now. The cost of living, the cost of effort, and the weight that came with providing without being asked to. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand what it meant that I had done it all for them, without ever throwing it in their faces. Until now. It was a quiet Wednesday night, the kind where nothing special was happening and no one was talking more than they had to. I was sitting at the table sorting through some paperwork when Lily walked in, holding a folded sheet of notebook paper and an envelope. She looked nervous, not like she'd done something wrong. More like she wasn't sure if she had the right to be there. She sat down across from me without saying anything at first, then slid the envelope across the table. I'm only applying to 1 school, she said, barely above a whisper. I know we talked about 3, but I can't afford it right now. I've been saving from the cafe. There's $250 in there. I didn't open the envelope. I just looked at her and nodded once. She held my gaze a little longer than usual, and then quietly said, I know it's not much. It's not nothing, I told her. That was it. She stood up and left the room. No long speeches, no apology tangled in big emotions. Just a simple act, honest and heavy, placed in my hands like a peace offering. A few days later, I noticed Haley doing something that caught me off guard. She was sitting at the kitchen counter with a notepad and her phone calculator, scribbling numbers and crossing things out. I didn't ask what she was doing, just watched from a distance. Later that evening, she handed Melissa a receipt and $20. That's for groceries, she said. I grabbed the stuff we were out of on my way home. I didn't say anything at the time, just nodded again like it was no big deal. But it was. It was the biggest deal in the world. They stopped asking for money altogether. Haley started packing her own lunches again, and Lily quit hinting about things she needed for art. They began managing their own lives like people who knew what things cost. I could see the effort in the way they moved, the way they spoke. They were still kids in so many ways, but they were learning. Not because I made them feel worthless, but because I finally made them feel responsible. What they didn't know was that every time they handed over money for something, a bill, a school fee, a bag of groceries, I took that amount and quietly transferred it into their original college funds. The ones I'd stopped contributing to after that day in the driveway. I wasn't doing it for them to find out. I was doing it because they were earning it now, dollar by dollar, the way real life demands. And because deep down, no matter how much it hurt, I still wanted them to succeed. They had broken something, and they knew it. But piece by piece, they were trying to build it back. Not with words, but with actions. And that mattered more than any apology ever could. It started with small things. A thank you here, a quiet, how was work, when I walked through the door, a plate rinsed and left in the sink instead of abandoned on the coffee table. At first, I figured it was part of the routine they were trying to rebuild, something Melissa had asked them to do, maybe. But then it kept happening. Lily started folding laundry that wasn't hers without being asked. Haley vacuumed the living room on a Saturday morning, no eye rolls, no complaints, just did it and moved on. It was the kind of respect that didn't need to be announced. It just showed up, quietly, consistently. One morning, Lily came into the garage while I was loading up the van. She had her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled up, and a nervous look that reminded me of when she was little, and asked if she could hold the wrench while I worked on the sink. "Can I come with you today?" she asked. "I want to see what it's really like." I didn't ask questions. I just handed her a bottle of water and told her to hop in. That day's job was a service call in a gated neighborhood I'd worked in a few times before. Massive house, clean landscaping, white stone driveway that probably cost more than my truck. We were there to repair a tankless water heater that had shorted out, tucked neatly behind a wall in a spotless utility room. Lily stayed quiet while I worked, but I caught her watching me closely. When I explained the circuitry, the pressure readings, and how the valve system regulated the flow, she asked real questions. Thoughtful ones. Not to flatter me, but because she genuinely wanted to understand. When we left, she looked back at the house and said, "That was nothing like what I pictured." I nodded and told her, "It's not always toilets." That night, she told Melissa over dinner, "Dad's work is actually kind of badass." The following week, Haley had a different moment, one I didn't see but heard about later. Melissa mentioned it casually, like she wasn't sure I even needed to know. Apparently, a kid at school made some dumb comment in class about plumbers being gross or dumb or only useful when the toilet overflows. And without hesitation, Haley shut it down. She looked him straight in the face and said, "My dad's a plumber, and he makes more money than most of your dads. He owns his business, works harder than anyone I know, and doesn't sit behind a desk complaining all day. So maybe watch your mouth." The kid didn't say anything back, and neither did the teacher. When Melissa told me, I didn't say much at first. Just sat there with that quiet weight in my chest, the kind that doesn't feel like pain, but something close to relief. Haley didn't tell me herself, but I noticed the way she looked at me later that night. Less like I was just the guy who paid the bills, and more like someone she was proud of. Respect had left our house for a long time. But now, it was walking back through the front door, not because I demanded it, but because they had learned what it cost to earn.